crowded room filled with voices, something strange happens. Everyone is speaking. Words fill the air like static. Opinions, arguments, jokes, commands. People interrupt each other, fight to be heard, to prove they exist through noise. Yet, in the far corner of the room, someone stands in silence. They don't fidget. They don't smile. They don't speak. And yet, everyone notices them. No one quite knows why, but their presence feels louder than the loudest voice in the room. It feels calculated, intense, powerful. They are not speaking, but somehow they are saying everything. Silence, a void, a vacuum, but also a mirror, a storm waiting to be understood. Most people fear silence. In fact, we're trained to fill it with words, with distractions, with noise, because silence, in its raw form, is uncomfortable. It leaves too much space for reflection, for the mind to wander into places we've been conditioned to avoid. But what if that discomfort is not a sign of emptiness, but of depth? What if silence is not the absence of meaning, but the concentration of it? Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." What if behind the noise of the world, something else is happening? Something we're trained not to see. This isn't about introversion. It's not about being shy or reserved. This is about something more primal, something older than language itself. It's about power, the kind that doesn't need validation. There's a reason the most dangerous person in a room is often the quiet one, not because they are hiding something, but because they've stopped playing the game. They are no longer reacting. They are observing, measuring, knowing. Silence is not passive. It's a weapon, a shield, a statement. Sometimes it's an act of defiance. Sometimes it's the sound of processing truth. Other times, it's simply the echo of someone who no longer seeks approval. But it always says something. We live in an age where presence is confused with performance. We are told that to matter, we must speak. We must brand. We must post, respond, declare, defend. To be silent is to be invisible, and to be invisible is to be irrelevant. But this assumption is new, and it's fragile, because long before the internet, long before mass communication, silence held a sacred status. Monks, sages, warriors, they understood something we've forgotten, that silence is a form of discipline, a channel into the deeper layers of self. So what does your silence say about you? In a culture addicted to stimulation, to resist the urge to speak can feel like self-erasure. But maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of true clarity. Maybe silence is the only place left where we can truly hear ourselves. This is the journey we are about to take. Through Carl Jung's forgotten psychology, through historical figures who mastered the art of quiet power, through myths, symbols, and psychological warfare, we'll explore why silence unsettles people, why it's feared, misunderstood, and often misread. We'll uncover how silence can be your greatest weapon, your deepest truth, and your most dangerous presence. Because sometimes the loudest message you'll ever send is the one you never speak at all. Let's begin. There is a silence that doesn't beg to be broken, a silence that doesn't scream for attention, or demand a response. It lingers like a presence behind your thoughts, watching, waiting. And in that stillness, something ancient begins to stir. Not outside, but deep within. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dared to map the dark terrain of the human psyche, called it the shadow. But unlike the shadows cast by the sun, Jung's shadow was internal, an accumulation of everything we refuse to be, every emotion we suppress, every instinct society taught us to deny. The shadow isn't just what we hide from others, it's what we hide from ourselves. Jung believed that silence was not the absence of noise, it was the presence of confrontation. When a person falls into deep silence, not the casual quiet of small talk, paused, but the thick, weighted silence of someone confronting a truth. They are not disengaging from the world. They are stepping into a private battlefield, one where the enemy wears their own face. In the myths and dreams Jung studied, the figure of the silent watcher appeared again and again, a lone observer, a guardian of the threshold, sometimes a wise old man, sometimes a monstrous double, always watching, never speaking. This archetype, Jung believed, was the embodiment of the shadow, our repressed self, waiting to be acknowledged. To the modern world, silence is often seen as emptiness. Introversion is confused with weakness. A lack of words is treated as a lack of thought. But Jung understood that silence could be sacred, that it was, in fact, a mirror, reflecting not the world, but the self. Most people live on the surface of their minds. They speak to be heard, post to be seen, and react to be validated. But Jung argued that the true self doesn't emerge in noise. It emerges in quiet, in retreat, in solitude, in that space where no one is watching and no one is listening. The modern obsession with extroversion, loudness, dominance, endless stimulation, has made silence feel like failure. If you're not talking, you're losing. If you're not seen, you're irrelevant. But Jung warned that the louder the world becomes, the more deaf we grow to the voice within. He once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." This was not poetry. It was instruction, an invitation to descend into the silence and meet the part of you that you've exiled. The jealous part, the angry part, the scared part. The parts that don't fit your image. The parts you deny, not because they're wrong, but because they're real. This is the shadow. It isn't evil. It's honest. It tells you what you truly want. It exposes the lies you live by. It challenges your persona, the mask you wear to survive society. And silence is the threshold through which it enters. Think of the moments in life when you've been most silent, not because you had nothing to say, but because saying it would shatter something. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was rage, maybe it was the realization that the life you're living isn't yours. That moment, raw, unspoken, is a meeting with your shadow. Jung saw this meeting not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough, a sacred confrontation, one that, if avoided, would poison you slowly, but if faced, could transform you completely. This is why he revered quiet people, the brooding ones, the deep thinkers, the ones who don't always speak, but always notice, because they are often carrying a war inside, one the world may never see. A war between the self they pretend to be and the self they truly are. In a society obsessed with performance, silence becomes rebellion. It is a refusal to conform to the rhythm of artificial noise. It is a psychological stance, a space where the unconscious can speak, not in words, but in symbols, dreams, and impulses. Jung believed that these unspoken messages were not distractions. They were instructions, and they were often the only map to our real identity. Yet silence is not comfortable. It forces us to sit with ourselves, with our contradictions, our regrets, our forgotten desires. This is why most people drown it out with distraction, because to be silent is to be vulnerable. It strips away the applause, the likes, the approval, and in that nakedness, the shadow emerges. And here's the paradox. The more you deny your shadow, the more power it gains. The more you run from it, the more it sabotages your life. But if you turn toward it, if you dare to face what you fear about yourself, then silence becomes sacred. It becomes the birthplace of transformation. Jung did not ask us to destroy the shadow. He asked us to integrate it, to make peace with it, because it holds the parts of us we need to become whole. Creativity, courage, passion, all live in the shadow, buried under layers of fear and conditioning. And the only way to retrieve them is to go into the silence and listen. In many ancient cultures, silence was not awkward, it was respected. A space for reflection, a time for the soul to speak. Our ancestors understood what we've forgotten, that the most powerful truths are never shouted. They arrive in whispers, in stillness, in the spaces between sentences. Carl Jung knew that. He saw the silent not as passive, but as powerful, not disengaged, but deeply engaged, with something the world doesn't always value, inner truth. So next time you find yourself in silence, real silence, the kind that makes you uncomfortable, don't run from it. Enter it. Explore it. Because in that silence lives a version of you that you've been waiting to meet. Not the version shaped by likes and followers, but the version shaped by truth. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your beginning. And the silence, that's where it starts to speak. The world has never been louder. From the moment we open our eyes, we're bombarded by pings, alerts, slogans, opinions, and demands for our attention. Silence is no longer a space. We treat it like a void, a failure to engage. But beneath this cultural obsession with noise lies a question that's both ancient and terrifying. What are we trying to drown out? Carl Jung once warned that when societies begin to lose contact with the individual soul, a dangerous thing happens. The collective takes over. And when the collective becomes too loud, it stops thinking. It starts echoing, reacting, performing. What we now call trending. In Jung's theory of the collective unconscious, human beings inherit more than genes. We inherit archetypes, instincts, primal fears, and ancient stories. These form the psychic blueprint of humanity, a shared memory beneath our awareness. But in today's age, something has gone wrong. The collective has not stayed unconscious. It has awakened, and it now lives outside us, in the digital hive mind. Social media is not just a tool. It is the architecture of a new consciousness, a place where the individual becomes data, where the soul becomes algorithm, where identity becomes performance. Every post is a mask, every opinion is a signal, and every silence is punished. Sociologist Irving Goffman called it the performance self, the idea that we present curated versions of ourselves to fit social expectations. Jung saw this as the persona, a necessary mask, but one that becomes dangerous when mistaken for the self. Today, we've gone further. We've monetized the mask, built empires on it, and in doing so, we've silenced the part of ourselves that doesn't want to be watched, doesn't want to be judged, and doesn't want to perform. The internet rewards noise, not truth, not depth, not reflection, just noise. The more extreme your take, the more viral your clip, the more aggressive your tone, the more currency you gain. This isn't accidental. It's design. Propaganda has always thrived in chaos, because in a world addicted to reaction, subtlety dies. Silence becomes subversion. Byung-Chul Han, the Korean-German philosopher, calls this the society of transparency, where every thought must be exposed, every moment documented, every silence interpreted as guilt. Privacy, once a sanctuary, is now treated like secrecy, and secrecy like danger. But Han warns that in this constant exposure, we lose depth, we lose soul. Everything becomes surface, everything becomes noise. Consider the word engagement. In the world of platforms, it means clicks, comments, shares. But in the world of psychology, engagement once meant something richer: attention, presence, connection. The modern definition is shallow, because the modern system doesn't want your soul. It wants your habits. It wants you impulsive, anxious, scrolling. Noise isn't just a byproduct of culture anymore. It's a weapon. In wartime, noise has always been used to destabilize. Sirens, misinformation, false alarms, tools of confusion. Today, it's subtler. It's content overload. It's emotional whiplash. A devastating tragedy in the morning. A meme by noon. Political outrage at 5. A dance trend at 6. We never land, never digest, never think. The mind becomes a spinning wheel, moving fast, going nowhere. And in all this, silence becomes suspicious. A person who doesn't speak up must be hiding something. A person who retreats must be broken. A person who doesn't post must be irrelevant. This cultural conditioning is not just shallow, it's strategic, because a population that fears silence is a population that fears introspection, and a population that fears introspection is easy to manipulate. Jung understood that without introspection, without time alone with the unconscious, a human being is at the mercy of the collective shadow. Not just their own repressed instincts, but the instincts of the herd: rage, fear, scapegoating. When reflection dies, projection thrives. We begin to see enemies everywhere, in the quiet, in the different, in the unknown. This is why silent people are often feared or dismissed, not because they lack value, but because they make others uncomfortable. They force a confrontation, not through aggression, but through absence. They reflect a kind of freedom, freedom from validation, freedom from noise, and that kind of freedom is dangerous in a world built on control. But the truth is, silence is not the enemy. It is the last territory where the self can breathe. In silence, we remember what we truly think, what we truly feel. In silence, we reclaim attention, and attention is power. Modern noise is psychological warfare, not because it shouts at you, but because it keeps you from hearing yourself. It fills every gap, colonizes every moment, makes sure that your inner voice is drowned in the flood of outer ones. Yet there's a secret in all this, a kind of rebellion that doesn't require a protest sign or a viral speech, just a choice to unplug, to turn inward, to listen to the silence and not run from it, because the truth is still there, buried under layers of trending noise, and it's waiting, not to be broadcast, but to be understood. This is the new resistance. Not louder voices, but deeper ones. Not more noise, but meaning. And meaning can't be manufactured. It must be discovered in solitude, in reflection, in the ancient, uncomfortable quiet that has always been the birthplace of change. The psychological warfare of modern noise is real, but it can't reach you in the silence. That's where your sovereignty begins. Some of the most powerful revolutions in human history began with silence, not with a speech, not with a battle cry, but with a quiet presence that demanded the world lean in and listen without saying a word. Take Mahatma Gandhi, a man who faced one of the largest empires in the world without raising his voice. His silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. During his weekly days of silence, he refused to speak to anyone, even during moments of political crisis. He believed silence wasn't a weakness to be overcome, but a force to be mastered. It was in silence that he found clarity, and it was through that clarity that he moved millions. Gandhi understood that silence was more than the absence of noise. It was a statement in itself. When the British expected aggression, he gave them stillness. When they sought rebellion through violence, he answered with unmoving resistance. His silence confused them. It forced them to confront something they couldn't attack, an interior force more disciplined than their external power. His quiet was louder than their commands. This is the paradox of charisma in quietness. We are taught that leaders must dominate a room, captivate through noise. But history tells a different story. It tells us that stillness unsettles more than shouting ever could. Consider Rosa Parks. On December 1st, 1955, she refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said no and stayed seated. That silent act ignited a movement that would change the course of history. There were no theatrics, no grand speeches, just an unmovable dignity. Her silence carried centuries of resistance. And in that quiet, America heard something it could no longer ignore. Jung believed that a person who has achieved inner wholeness radiates something that cannot be faked. It doesn't require performance. It doesn't require noise. It simply is. This is what he meant when he said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." In the presence of someone psychologically integrated, someone who has made peace with their shadow, you don't need to hear their voice to feel their impact. We see this in Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor. Unlike the grand orators of his time, he preferred journals to speeches. He wrote not to impress others, but to discipline himself. His meditations, written in solitude, were never meant for public consumption, and yet they became one of the most powerful documents of leadership in history. His silence was not detachment, it was depth. He ruled the Roman Empire while waging an inner war few ever saw, and it was in the silence of his writings that his true philosophy emerged. Control the self, and you control the world. Even in the modern age, silence can be a calculated weapon. Vladimir Putin is a man whose silence unnerves global leaders. His stoic expression, his long pauses during interviews, his refusal to answer questions directly, they aren't accidental. They're psychological moves. In negotiation theory, silence is often used to create discomfort, to tip the balance of power. Putin wields that silence with surgical precision. Agree with him or not, his silence commands attention, because in a world addicted to over-explaining, underreacting becomes power. Silence can mean resistance. It can mean reflection. It can also mean domination, depending on who holds it and why. Throughout history, the most dangerous people have not been the loudest. They've been the ones who knew when not to speak, who understood that stillness creates uncertainty, that silence invites projection, and that when used deliberately, it can shift entire narratives without uttering a word. In psychological terms, silence amplifies presence. When someone walks into a room and says nothing, yet everyone notices, they carry an energy rooted in something deeper than words. Carl Jung would call it individuation, the state of becoming whole, of integrating every part of oneself, light and shadow alike. The individuated person does not need to shout. Their silence speaks enough. In every era, the world has mistaken silence for invisibility. But time and again, those who chose stillness over spectacle left the deepest marks, not because they forced themselves to be heard, but because they mastered the art of being felt. History doesn't just remember the noise, it remembers the pauses, the refusal, the withheld response, because in those moments, humanity saw something rare: control, depth, and a message that could only be delivered in silence. Sometimes, silence is not what you fall into, it's what you rise into, and when it's held by someone who understands its power, it becomes more than quiet. It becomes revolution. Across time, across continents, across the dreams of unknown men, and the epics of ancient cultures, there is a figure that appears again and again. They walk quietly. They speak rarely. They watch everything, but explain nothing. The silent one. This archetype transcends story. It exists in memory, in myth, in cinema, and in the unconscious mind. It is the one who says little, but sees everything, and though the world forgets noise quickly, it never forgets the weight of a silence that speaks to something deeper. In the Buddhism, the silent monk is not mute. He is awake. Silence, in that tradition, is not emptiness. It is enlightenment. The monk does not withdraw from the world because he is afraid of it. He withdraws because he understands it too well. Through meditation and silence, he hears the patterns others miss. He becomes a witness to suffering without becoming its prisoner. His silence is not weakness, it is mastery. In the Abrahamic traditions, silence often precedes revelation. Moses does not speak eloquently. In fact, he begs God to send someone else, claiming he is slow of speech, yet he becomes the voice of liberation. Ezekiel, before being allowed to speak to the people, is struck dumb for days. In Christianity, Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness, alone, silent, tempted, and in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad receives his first revelation not in a crowd, but in a cave, alone, in silence, again and again. Revelation and transformation begin with retreat, with stillness. It's not the loud prophet who is most trusted. It is the one who carries silence like a sacred burden. Because silence in religion does not mean absence, it means listening to something beyond the noise of the world. In cinema, we find this archetype re-emerging in a darker form. The unnamed driver in Drive, Blondie in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. These characters speak less than they act. They do not explain themselves. They do not narrate their thoughts. They exist on the edge of language, as forces, calm, terrifying, magnetic. We are drawn to them, not because we understand them, but because we don't. Because in a world of over-explanation, the unspoken becomes mythic. Anime and noir thrillers follow the same path. The cold, observant detective, the emotionally scarred swordsman, the mysterious student who says nothing, yet sees everything. In dystopian fiction, silence is survival. Words are watched, thoughts are monitored, so the hero learns to hold truth inside, to hide meaning in stillness. But what is it about these silent figures that makes them so unforgettable? Carl Jung would say they are archetypes, primordial images rooted in our collective unconscious, and the silent one appears in many forms. The hermit, who withdraws from society to gain wisdom. The observer, who watches from the margins but holds the key to the truth. The anti-hero, who doesn't follow the rules but reflects our shadow selves. These characters speak to something buried in all of us, the part that doesn't want to perform, that doesn't want to explain, that just wants to be, fully, quietly, truthfully. In our waking lives, we play roles, we curate personas, we chase applause, but in our dreams, it is often the silent figure who leads us, the one who says nothing, but stares until we understand. Silence, in this light, becomes not just absence, but symbol, a message from the unconscious, a whisper from a deeper truth. It says, not everything that matters can be spoken. This is why the silent archetype has persisted through every age, because language is often a mask, a performance, but silence strips that away. What remains is presence, weight, depth. The monk, the prophet, the driver, the detective, the swordsman, each one is the same figure in different clothing. They are not here to impress us. They are here to reflect us, to show us the part of ourselves we've abandoned, the part that feels deeply, sees clearly, and chooses silence, not out of fear, but out of knowing. In myth, in film, in scripture, the silent one carries power because they do not waste it. Their quiet is a boundary, a line that says, I do not need to explain myself to exist. And in a world drowning in noise, that kind of presence becomes divine. The silent archetype endures because we need it. We are exhausted by explanation. We are starved for meaning. And we know, intuitively, that the loudest truths are often the least trustworthy. So we return, again and again, to the figure who walks quietly through fire, who stands still when others run, who speaks only when the silence is ready to break, not because they are empty, but because they are full. There comes a moment in every thinking person's life when they realize this world doesn't just want their time, it wants their reaction, your anger, your fear, your outrage, your applause. Your energy is currency. Your attention is fuel. And if you look closely enough, you'll see every manipulation, every tactic of control, every power play begins with the same simple trap, a demand for your response. But what if you refuse? What if your silence is not weakness, but warfare? In the world of psychological survival, there's a tactic known as gray rocking. It's a method used by those caught in abusive relationships, especially with narcissists, sociopaths, or manipulators. The logic is simple. When you stop giving emotional reactions, you become boring. When you become boring, you become useless to the manipulator. And when you're useless, you're free. Gray rocking isn't about running. It's not about confrontation. It's about removing the one thing a manipulator needs to survive: your emotional fuel, your outrage, your attention, your fear. You don't fight. You withdraw. You become still, impenetrable, a stone in the current, and the results are startling. Narcissists unravel when ignored. Tyrants tremble when crowds stop reacting. Propaganda fails when no one shares it. Because all systems of control depend on one thing: participation. This is the overlooked power of silence. In a world built on reaction, not reacting becomes rebellion. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He said, "What you resist persists. When you fight something, you feed it. When you deny it, you tie yourself to it. But when you observe it, calmly, without fear, without noise, it loses power. It becomes exposed. And what is exposed can no longer control you. The manipulator thrives on drama. The propagandist counts on division. The system expects you to respond. That's how it stays alive, by keeping you entangled in its game. Every time you scream at it, share it, protest it without reflection, you're still playing. But silence is exit. Silence is the refusal to carry the wound of your enemy, the refusal to be baited, the refusal to make your consciousness available for exploitation. This doesn't mean silence is always passive. True silence is active. It's not suppression, it's sovereignty, the ability to hold your energy, guard your attention, and choose your response instead of being hijacked by every impulse or narrative thrown your way. In relationships, silence breaks patterns. Abusers escalate when they're challenged, but fall apart when their chaos no longer lands. In politics, silence unsettles the ideologue, because if you don't scream in opposition, if you don't parrot the script, They can't categorize you. You become unreadable, and in unreadability, you reclaim your power. There's a reason oppressive systems fear the quiet ones. Because they're unpredictable. They can't be guilt-tripped, manipulated, or easily provoked. Their silence isn't apathy, it's insulation. Silence is not a lack of voice, it's a guarding of voice. In a landscape where every algorithm is engineered to trigger you, choosing not to respond becomes psychological armor, and over time, that armor becomes presence, depth, a gravitational field that no longer bends to every passing noise. This is why the strongest people often speak the least, not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer feel compelled to explain themselves to systems designed to misunderstand them. In spiritual traditions, silence was always considered a path to power. Monks, sages, and mystics withdrew not to escape the world, but to master it from within. They understood what modern man has forgotten. Noise is distraction, and distraction is control. We are taught to believe that speaking up is always strength, that the louder you are, the more you matter. But volume isn't power. Noise is often fear in disguise. Real power doesn't shout. It waits, it watches, it decides. Silence, in the face of manipulation, is not surrender. It is strategic non-compliance. It is removing yourself from the arena where your value is tied to your emotional performance. It is saying, you will not bait me. You will not drain me. You will not define me. Think about this world for a moment. Think about how many systems are designed to provoke you. Social media thrives on outrage. News cycles fuel anxiety. Online debates are less about truth and more about signaling identity. In this climate, silence is not disengagement. It's detox, a return to clarity. It takes strength to sit with discomfort and not react. It takes self-possession to see manipulation and not flinch. It takes deep psychological awareness to know that by not resisting, you transcend. The manipulator hopes you'll scream. The narcissist hopes you'll fight. The ideologue hopes you'll submit or rebel, anything but remain still, because stillness reflects, and reflection reveals the illusion. In that sense, silence is not just rebellion, it's revolution, a dismantling of the invisible systems that feed on your unconscious behavior. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you taste the strength of non-reaction, noise loses its grip. You no longer argue to win. You no longer perform to belong. You no longer react to prove you exist. You just are. And that being, calm, alert, quiet, is everything this world cannot control. In a society built on psychological warfare, silence is not just a survival tactic. It's a signal, a refusal, a declaration that your mind is yours, your energy is sacred, and your presence is no longer up for auction. And when enough people choose that silence, not as absence, but as awakened awareness, the whole game begins to collapse. Because you cannot manipulate someone who does not move. There comes a time when a person begins to wonder if everything they've been chasing, the applause, the approval, the metrics, the noise, is not freedom, but a distraction from something more difficult, something quieter, something real. The world celebrates the performer, the person who speaks, posts, reacts, and builds an identity on visibility. But the modern monk is not interested in visibility. The modern monk seeks something else, inner wholeness, not to be seen, but to see, not to be heard, but to hear. What lies beneath the surface? Carl Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the self. It is not about self-improvement. It is about self-encounter, and the path begins, always, in silence. Meditation is not an escape from life. It is an unmasking, a deliberate turning inward. You sit, you breathe, you watch the mind unravel, and you discover something unsettling. The noise wasn't outside. It was inside you all along. Thoughts, judgments, fears, projections, all rising and falling in the silence. And if you keep watching, something shifts. The noise doesn't go away, but you stop being owned by it. In this space, the shadow speaks, not through words, but through feeling, through resistance, through the moments that make you uncomfortable. And when you stop running from those moments, when you simply observe them without reacting, you begin to understand. You're not just the light you show the world. You're also the darkness you hide from yourself. To become whole, you must face both. This is what Jung meant by holding the tension of opposites. The modern world demands resolution. Choose a side, pick a label, fight for your truth. But real strength lies in being able to sit with contradiction, to feel rage and not act on it, to feel fear and not collapse, to recognize your need for approval and still choose solitude. Silence becomes the crucible where all of this happens. It doesn't mean absence of thought. It means presence with thought. It means becoming the observer of your own mind, not its prisoner. And that's what the modern monk embodies. Not robes or rituals, but a shift in posture, from reaction to reflection, from identity performance to identity inquiry, from seeking outer validation to cultivating inner truth. You can live in the city, use technology, navigate society, and still be a monk. Because it's not about isolation, it's about intention. It's about choosing depth over drama, meaning over momentum, stillness over spectacle. In this world, where every app is designed to fracture your attention, silence becomes revolution. But more than that, it becomes revelation. The place where your authentic self, stripped of roles and performances, finally steps forward. There is no applause here, no audience, just presence. And in that presence, something strange begins to happen. You stop needing to prove. You stop needing to defend. You stop needing to be anything other than what you are. This is not indifference, it's transcendence, a state where your actions no longer arise from insecurity, but from insight, where your words are no longer defenses, but expressions of clarity, where your life becomes less about being impressive and more about being aligned. The modern monk isn't running from the world. They're walking through it without becoming it, with eyes open, with a quiet mind, with a presence that speaks louder than noise ever could. And in that silence, they've found something no performance can deliver: wholeness. And you cannot control someone who no longer reacts. The world hasn't changed. the noise continues. The demands for attention, the flood of opinions, the constant call to perform, to explain, to defend. None of it has stopped. The chaos still swirls. The systems still manipulate. The power structures still hunger for your energy, your outrage, your reaction. But now, something has shifted. The silent figure remains in the crowd, unmoved, unbothered, but no longer misunderstood. He is not empty. He is not weak. He is not confused. He is composed, aware, unshakable. He has stopped arguing because he sees what lies beneath the argument. He has stopped chasing because he understands the price of endless pursuit. He has stopped performing because he has remembered who he was before the world told him who to be. In a society that equates visibility with value, silence becomes threatening because it cannot be controlled. It cannot be baited. It cannot be commodified. And in that refusal to participate, silence becomes louder than any scream. It becomes a mirror. And when the manipulative look into it, they see themselves and they flinch because silence reveals what noise hides. It uncovers motives. It exposes agendas. It forces the world to confront what it would rather distract itself from. And yet, for the one who is silent, not out of fear, but out of fullness, there is no need to expose or react or retaliate. There is only being, witnessing, embodying. The truth is not always loud. Wisdom does not demand applause, and power does not always announce itself. Perhaps the most profound truths are not shouted, written, or preached, but lived quietly in the presence of those who do not need to be heard to be seen. The silent man is not voiceless. He has simply transcended the need to speak, and in doing so, he speaks with the only voice that truly echoes, the voice of presence, the voice of wholeness, the voice of one who no longer needs the world to understand, because he finally understands himself.